Our next installation, for lack of a better term, of our serial killer profiles is Randall Woodfield, aka the I-5 killer. I-5 is a highway that is on the West Coast, so this is all happening in like Washington, Oregon, that area. So let's get started. The case of the I-5 killer demonstrates that even on the brink of athletic fame and gifted with incredible talent, sometimes there isn't enough to keep some minds psychologically invested in walking the path of legal society. Even though he was a star football player who seemed to have everything going for him, Randall Woodfield puzzled coaches, teammates, and family members with his odd behavior and penchant for indecent exposure. A standout wide receiver at his high school in Newport, Oregon, and later at Portland State University, Woodfield was a gifted athlete, but he was also constantly being arrested for publicly exposing himself to women. Woodfield's high school football coaches kept the story of his first arrest for indecent exposure quiet, so he would not be kicked off the football team. While playing college football for the Portland State Vikings, Woodfield led a bizarre double life. On the one hand, he performed well on the field, and he was active in the campus crusade for Christ and the Fellowship of Christian Athletes. Off the field, however, Woodfield's behavior was anything but exemplary. He was arrested on a number of occasions for indecent exposure, and he was convicted twice. Despite his psychological issues and legal record, the Green Bay Packers selected Randall Woodfield in the 1974 NFL Draft. Woodfield was excited about his prospects for an NFL career, but he was ultimately cut by the Packers after his first training camp. Instead of moving straight back to Oregon, Woodfield caught on with a semi-pro football team in Wisconsin, where he played for one season before being released again. During his time in Wisconsin, Woodfield was involved in more than 10 instances of indecent exposure. Dejected and with a failed athletic career, Woodfield returned to his home state of Oregon. In Oregon, Woodfield fell into a life of unstable jobs and eventually crime. Living in Portland in 1975, Woodfield's erratic behavior continued, and he began accosting women with a knife and sexually assaulting them before he robbed them. Once authorities realized there was a sexual predator on the prowl, Portland police had female officers pose as regular citizens. On March 5, 1975, police apprehended a knife-wielding man who attempted to attack a female officer in a park. It was Randall Woodfield. He was convicted and served 4 years in prison, and he was released in July 1979. Once he was released from prison, Woodfield graduated from robbery and sexual assault to murder. His first victim was 29-year-old Sherry Ayers, a high school classmate of Woodfield's. She was found raped and stabbed to death in her Portland apartment on October 11, 1980. Though Woodfield was questioned in Ayers' death, he refused to take a polygraph test, and because there was no physical evidence at the crime scene tied to Woodfield, police had to let him go. Woodfield soon struck again, shooting and killing 22-year-old Darcy Fix and 24-year-old Doug Altick. As with Sherry Ayers, Woodfield had a connection with Darcy Fix. One of his closest friends from Portland State University had dated her. During this period, Woodfield also embarked on a robbery spree throughout Oregon and Washington, donning a fake beard and robbing gas stations and other businesses. Various composite sketches were released during this crime spree. The press dubbed the robber the I-5 Bandit, due to the proximity of the crimes to Interstate 5. In January 1981, Woodfield murdered again, this time raping and shooting 2 women in an office building in Salem, Oregon. However, this time Woodfield made a mistake, as one of the 2 women Woodfield shot survived the attack but was unable to identify the killer. Randall Woodfield's compulsion to assault and murder women continued throughout the early months of 1981. In February, he killed a woman and her 14-year-old daughter in Mountain Gate, California. The same day, he kidnapped, robbed, and raped an 18-year-old waitress. The next day, Woodfield did it again. By this point, witnesses were all giving police similar physical descriptions of the assailant, an athletic white man who wore a Band-Aid or athletic tape over his nose. Based on his past criminal record and a behavior profile, police believed that Randall Woodfield was the serial killer they were hunting, so they focused their efforts on capturing him. Woodfield certainly fit the part. He had served time for assaulting women, he knew his way up and down the I-5 corridor, and he was personally acquainted with several of the victims. Eventually, a survivor of one of Woodfield's many attacks picked him out of a lineup. With this, police were able to get a warrant to search the room Woodfield was renting in Springfield, Oregon, and they found the evidence they needed to convict him: a spent .32 caliber bullet and the same type of tape that had been used to tie up a number of the I-5 killer's victims. The I-5 bandit, now the I-5 killer, had been caught. Woodfield was found guilty of murder in Oregon in June 1981 and was sentenced to life in prison. Randall Woodfield has been linked to almost 20 murders, but he is suspected in many unsolved murders, and some investigators believe that the murder count for the I-5 killer may be closer to 50, not including the dozens of rapes and robberies he also committed.